Hello everyone. Just so you know, I am enjoying this video. This is part 2. I have a little bit of food here. I have some dinner because I'm hungry and it's a little late and I want to just get this video watched because so I'm gonna do it. I'll mute it when I eat. I got some tomato soup. Anyways, this is part 2. We'll do another 17 minutes. And so far it's been really good. I'm liking what he's saying so far. It's been pretty interesting. He has not talked about Khalid yet, but it's setting everything up. So let's get into it.
The Persians, 9,000 soldiers are tearing these Romans to pieces. The only thing that saves the Romans is the sun goes down. And the Persians and the Romans basically call it. They break up into camps to eat and cook and then go to sleep. In the morning, Crassus comes out and he says, "Let's talk." And the Persian general, his name was Suren. He's on horse. And Suren says, "There's nothing to talk about." He had a stick with him. He draws a line in the ground and he says, "This side is Persian, this side is Rome. That line is the Euphrates River." And Crassus goes, "No!" And when he does, one of the Roman soldiers freaks out, reaches over and grabs the rein of Suren's horses, and the fight starts again. Because the Persians see that and swords come out and they just tear the Romans to pieces again on the second day.
Jeez.
About 10,000 Romans escaped. About 10,000 Romans were captured.
Well, it was 40,000 total, I believe.
Including Crassus. And 20,000 Romans were killed.
Yeah.
And we don't have a real firm number, but about 200 Persians died.
Jeez.
When you outnumber the enemy 5-1, and they kill you at a ratio of 100-1, that's a bad day. That's a bad day. They wait until the Persian emperor shows up. His name is Orodes. Orodes brings Crassus into his tent. Crassus was wounded. He was in bad shape. The Persian surgeons were treating him because they wanted to keep him alive so that Orodes could have a nice conversation with him. They kept him alive. They bring him forward. They have him get on his knees in front of the Persian emperor. And Orodes goes, "The most important thing in Persian culture is to be a good host. You are my guest in the Persian Empire. You came here for gold. I will provide." They pried open Crassus's mouth and they brought a pot of molten gold.
I remember this.
And they poured it down his throat.
Oh, yeah.
That event triggers almost 700 years of back and forth warfare between the Romans and the Persians. Just back and forth. If you were to take all the fights and stum them together, the Romans managed to keep, so this is the border between the Romans and the Persians, they managed to keep something like this for most of that time period because the Romans had a fantastic navy in the Mediterranean. So every time the Persians would capture Syria or Palestine or Egypt or Anatolia, the Romans could respond with their navy and deploy troops behind the Persians. And then that made it so the Persians could never really hold any land to the west of their empire. But as a general rule, the Persians usually won. Not always. The Romans sometimes beat up on them. But in the 3rd century, one Persian emperor, a guy named Shapur, beat 3 Roman emperors. And in fact, so badly, he captured one Roman emperor with 2 whole intact Roman legions. He was the first Roman emperor ever captured alive in battle. Crassus was not an emperor. He was a member of the Senate, and he was a governor, but he wasn't an emperor. The first captured Roman emperor ever was Emperor Valerian. In case you wanted to know that. Rome gets into really big trouble. In fact, so does Persia. They both get into really big trouble. In fact, all of Western civilization gets into really big trouble. And the reason is because of Indonesian fishermen. You know how they can go rogue.
Okay, this is going to be interesting.
They're so dangerous.
They're dangerous.
The Indonesians had discovered there were a bunch of islands through the middle of the Indian Ocean, and you could hop from island to island. So even though they didn't have truly ocean-worthy vessels, they had vessels that were ocean-worthy enough, you could get between the islands. And that made it so that you could start in Indonesia and head towards Africa, crossing the Indian Ocean, and you can island hop your whole way across. And before they knew it, they were on this really big island to the east of Africa called Madagascar. And when they got there, there were no humans living on Madagascar. They were just lemurs, our ancestors, but no humans. And they went, geez, let's set up a colony. And they did. And they began growing rice on the colony. And as they grew this rice, they began trading the rice with Africa. And before long, Africa itself began to grow the rice. And as they traded with other people, the rice began to spread across Africa until it got to places like Egypt. And before you knew it, rice was growing in Mesopotamia. And before you knew it, rice was growing even in southern parts of Europe. The reason why this is a problem is because to grow rice, you flood a field. And when you flood a field, you create a place for mosquitoes to grow.
Oh.
Malaria-bearing mosquitoes. And malaria ends up tearing up the entire region from Spain to Iran. Populations, the life expectancies absolutely plunge. If they were 40, 45, they dropped to 20, 25. And as a result, Rome's population goes into dramatic decline, and so does Iran's. And they're just barely scraping by. And then, as if that's not enough, there's an outbreak of the bubonic plague. It's frequently called Justinian's plague, in the middle of the 6th century, and it tears Rome and Persia to pieces. The bubonic plague does this really weird thing where it looks like...
Justinian, he was the emperor, right, of Rome? So they named a plague after him? That doesn't sound like he was a good emperor. I know the name Justinian, though.
It's on an 800-year cycle where it'll be dormant for 799 years. It'll wake up, tear through the human population for a year, maybe 2, max, and then go dormant again. When I say tear through the human population, the last bubonic plague outbreak, which was 1348, killed 40% of Europeans in a 1-year span of time.
Jesus.
It killed 60% of Middle Easterners and North Africans in that same year. So just put this in perspective, we're running about a 2% fatality rate with COVID, not a 50% fatality rate.
Yeah.
And then the bubonic plague goes back to sleep. For those of you doing the math real quick, it's 6.5 centuries. We got a century and a half left. And then it'll kick into high gear. I'm assuming this pattern is...
I want to have kids and pass them on down the line so that they can hopefully get affected and be killed by it. Joking.
It's going to go away. I don't know why it would all of a sudden. It's happened so many times now. I think we're on 4 or 5. So that's comforting to know. So by the time we get to the 6th century AD, the populations of both the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire are dramatically reduced. There are just simply fewer people living, which means less food, smaller armies, and a terrible economy. The Romans are barely making it. So some of you might be a little confused because you've been taught that Rome fell in 476. And I want to just restate, Rome did not fall in 476 AD. Rome fell in 1453 AD. And that's nonsense. All Rome did was reunify so that there was only one emperor, and the capital was Constantinople, which in this map is spelled with a K.
You know, a huge testimony for the Jewish people, and it's fairly well known that in the early steps.
Cool. So, there was a Roman emperor. His name was Mauricius, but of course we mispronounce everything, so I'll just say Maurice. 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 Mauricius is so much better. Emperor Mauricius had sided with a Persian trying to become the Persian emperor in the middle of a Persian civil war. His name was Khusro II. And when Khusro succeeded, he felt like, since Mauricius had helped him so much, he had to work with them, and they became friends. And then a Roman general named Phocas. Isn't that a good name? Like, because you know, like you're distracted and your parent shouts, "Focus!" It's just the perfect name for a kid. General Phocas was really angry because Mauricius had allowed a group of Phocas's men to get killed in an ambush, and he held this really nasty grudge. Eventually, Phocas ends up in Constantinople, and he murders the Roman emperor and makes himself the Roman emperor. So now Phocas in 602 AD is the Roman emperor. Khusro II, the Persian emperor, is outraged that his friend Mauricius has been killed like this, and so Khusro declares war on Rome to avenge the death of his friend and to depose Phocas. Initially, the Persians have some successes, but they don't last, and the war sort of drags on, and a bunch of nothing gets done. And then there's an uprising within the Roman Empire against Phocas. That uprising is led by a man named Heraclius, and Heraclius eventually takes over and becomes the new Roman emperor. The problem is this war now has a life of its own, and so even though Phocas is taken out of the picture, and in effect Khusro II gets his way, it doesn't matter anymore. They're in the war, they're just gonna go ahead and fight it out. And to make a long story short, a Persian general, his name was Shahbaraz. See where there's parts of the Roman Empire that they have vertical lines through them? Shahbaraz carved that chunk of the Roman Empire off and began ruling it himself, basically, because he eventually himself rebels against the Persians. And so there actually ends up being three empires. One empire that stretches from Egypt to Armenia, ruled by Shahbaraz, the Persian Empire to the east and the Roman Empire to the west. Eventually, Heraclius makes a deal with Shahbaraz to try to make him the new emperor to end the war. Heraclius actually ended up raising Shahbaraz's son. His name was Nicetas, and he raised him as a Christian. And so Emperor Heraclius is thinking...
That sounds like something that happened to Vlad the Impaler. His son being raised by the Ottoman. Yeah, kind of reminds me of that.
Nicetas will eventually become the Christian ruler of the Persian Empire. The struggle between Rome and Persia will finally end. And so he pushes really hard, backs Shahbaraz. Shahbaraz finally takes over Ctesiphon, the Persian capital, in 628. So this war went 26 years. He takes over the Persian capital, becomes the Persian emperor. He even mints a coin with his face on it, and 40 days later is stabbed to death. But the war ended, so that was good. It's just the goal wasn't achieved. 628. And this is where the intersection takes place between the story I wanted to tell you and the background that I gave you. In 610, in Arabia, so if you went right off the map to the south, That's where Mecca is. And then Stephen's going to scroll down for us. Right there, where it says Mecca.
Oh, okay. There it is. Yeah.
There is a man who receives prophecy from the Archangel Gabriel, and his name is Muhammad, and he becomes the prophet who will create Islam. I'm not going to give you the whole story, but I just want to make sure that we're clear approximately what we're talking about. In 622, the people of Mecca kick him and his followers out. So for 12 years, he built his religion in Mecca. He's kicked out by the Meccans who hate his religion, in part because they're worried that his religion is going to interfere with their prophets, but also his religion might replace their religion. When the Prophet Muhammad created Islam, his original goal was to take Christianity and Judaism and reunite them. He believed that it was an accident that Judaism and Christianity got separated, and he believed he had received the word of God to fix that and put it back together. But as time goes by, he concludes that the Christians and the Jews don't want anything to do with his new religion, and he realizes he's created a third Abrahamic religion, and it's separate. He ends up in 622 doing the Hijrah, which takes him to Yathrib, which on this map is spelled Yatrib. And the people there in Yathrib take him in, and eventually the city gets renamed. Medinat al-Nabi, which means the city of the prophet. Today we just call it Medina. So if you look at a map, you won't see Yathrib on there, a modern map. You'll see Medina. That's that city. In 625, the Muslims are going to have a fight with the Meccans, a battle, Uhud. And the Meccans beat the Muslims. In 627, the Meccans attack Yathrib, and they fight a battle called the Battle of the Trench. Khalid ibn Walid was a soldier in both of those battles. In 625, he was there when the Meccans defeated Muhammad and the Muslims, and he was fighting for the Meccans against the Muslims. In 627, he's there again at the Battle of the Trench, where the Muslims defeat the Meccans. Afterwards, and we don't know exactly when, but within 2 years, he switches sides and he converts to Islam. In 629, that's why I know it's within 2 years, he's marching with soldiers from Yathrib north. So see where it says Petra? Go to the east of that, there's a city called, or a town called Muta. And he marches towards Muta with this army. 3,000 Arabs, 3,000 Muslim Arabs. And their goal is to attack the Roman Empire, because they're in it. See where it says Bani Ghassan? The Ghassanids were Christian Arabs who fought for the Romans. Where it says Banu Lahm, those were Christian Arabs who fought for the Persians. So I'm going to have to be...
Wow.
Hey!
So I'm going to have to be careful here when I say Arabs. So I'm going to try to remember to say Muslim Arabs so that you know I'm not talking about the Christian Arabs fighting for the Romans or the Persians. Right? For the record, there are Jewish Arabs too in the whole mix, just to make it really complicated. In any case, they march to Muta. The Romans find out there's this Muslim army coming towards them. They don't take it very seriously, but they take it seriously enough they dispatch a force to go meet them. We don't know the exact size of...
I'm just going to stop it here, and then we'll jump right back into it, because it sounds like there's going to be a battle happening, and pretty interesting. Now they're talking about our guy. I'll tell you what, though. All that stuff leading up to it was fascinating. It was interesting. I could listen to this guy just tell me about a lot of different stuff. Good so far. Got a cough. Okay. I'm going to end this here. Get ready. Part 3. It's coming up next. Or tomorrow, if I've posted this. So like and subscribe, or a homeless man's going to give you a colonoscopy with his finger.